Hello, this is Michael Kraut from Idea Dudes, and we're going to talk about configuring sites and subnets. Welcome to the presentation. If you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the GoGo box. Let's get started. So far we've been talking about, we installed a domain controller, we talked about the operations masters with replication there, we converted the FRS to DFSR. Now we need to look at the actual replication. How do we control the replication? And that's using Active Directory sites and services. So we're going to look at how do we configure this. The sites and services, or Active Directory sites, is the physical representation for our Active Directory. So we're going to look at what is a site. A lot of people get sites confused. They don't understand actually what a site is. Well, we're going to give you a description of it. What is replication and how does replication work? Well, we already talked about DFSR. We've already converted it over. So now our domain is in DFSR. It's replicating through DFSR, so only the changes are being replicated. We have the service location, which is our SRV records. Service localization, meaning where we want to have our global catalogs, our PDC emulator, and so forth. Creating, or actually your global catalog, your domain controller, and your Kerberos, your SRV records. Then creating a site. Creating that site so that we can control our replication, control where our domain controllers are going to when we install them. And then creating a subnet, which is part of the site. Then SRV records. Then we have lab exercises. These are just some of the topics that we're going to be going over. So again, what I want you to do is make sure that you go through the labs. This is going to reinforce everything that we're talking about, and also it's going to help you on the exam, because we're going to go over some exam tips and so forth as I'm going through. So sit back and then let's get started. So when we're talking about sites, we have the domain, which is a logical representation. Forest is logical. Now we have what is the physical, which is going to be the sites. And a site is an object in Active Directory. It's a configuration container. Also contains the configuration as part or in the configuration container. And what it does is describes which subnet that it's associated with, or which part of Active Directory. It provides two functions, and it's really to manage replication traffic and to facilitate service localization, such as the global catalog. Now, replication traffic is transfers of changes between the DC, so the domain controllers. So with a site, if we have a different subnet, it's going to make it so there's no communications there. So what we need to do is we need to provide a way or a path so that these changes can be made. Adding an account or changing a password will be the example. Changing needs to be communicated to the other DCs. So that's replication traffic. There's two types of networks: highly connected and less highly connected. Highly connected means that all of our domain controllers are connected, like with a gigabit type infrastructure. Less highly connected would be domain controller that's over in Zimbabwe, that's ISDN. Active Directory sites is highly connected. Changes are received instantly. Replication between the sites can be scheduled and managed. So we can manage the sites, what the actual replication when it takes place, because it's going across low bandwidth. So service localization, this is AD as a distributed service, which we know. While several sites with DCs, the client is encouraged to authenticate to the local DC. So what does this mean? Okay, so I got a site. I have a domain controller. I have a client that wants to have access to information or be able to log into the domain. What it's going to do is it's going to query or ask the site, which is a domain controller that I should use. Well, if there's one within the site, then it's going to use that one. If it's not there, then we'll have one that may be advertised that the domain controller can use or the client can use. During the logon, the client is redirected or directed to the closest DC, which is local. DFS is localized service also, meaning distributed file system. Now, planning sites, you need to spend time planning. An Active Directory site can contain more than one network site. So it doesn't have to be by subnet, but a lot of times it's going to be by subnet. So we want to make it simple. We want to simplify the whole design process. Can be a subnet of a single network site. Sites serve site server in both replication and also service localization. So connection speed is one of the things that we need to look at. Active Directory sites represent the fast, reliable, inexpensive connectivity. The slowest link should be 512 kilobytes per second. Not kilobits, but kilobytes per second. So the service placement, we have service localization. This means we're going to place a DC in each Active Directory site. That makes it so that we're highly available for doing any type of authentication or looking for a DC. Other services can be added also. It brings the service to the client. That's what we're talking about. Service localization means that we're bringing the service to the client so they don't have to go very far to get to what they need. Now, based on the user population, that's going to also make a determination if we're going to have a site. Number of users impacts performance. You add a domain controller, that's going to make it so that individuals are going to be able to log on more rapidly. Configure replication to update this DC. And so that's what we're going to do. And we're going to show you how to create sites and site links and so forth. So summarizing a site planning criteria. At least one site, and the default first site name is going to be what is going to be the beginning of our sites. So default first site name you've been seeing throughout the course or courses, and you've been seeing I've been pointing out default first site name. Well, that's the first one. It's highly connected. We have all our DCs in there. Create additional sites. You create additional sites when you need to. Network is separated by a slow link. Ensure users available to support a DC or a service. Directory query traffic warrants a local DC for like the global catalog because it's going to query the global catalog. Control of service localization is required, such as your DCs or DFS. You want to control replication. That's why we create sites. It's not a matter of just putting them out there because of a subnet. It's because we want to control certain things. So defining a site, you can see right here we're creating one called Orlando. And Orlando is going to be using the default IP site link. And the default IP site link just means that it's going to be connected. So Orlando is the site that we're going to create. And you can see the subnet that we're going to be using is 10.11.0.16. So what does this mean? Well, it's going to be associated with Orlando. We have one called Palm Coast, and then we have Orlando. Orlando is going to, when we create or add a domain controller, based on the IP address, is going to be the determination of which site it's going to put it in. Such as 10.10.0.16 is going to put, that means if I have a domain controller that's 10.10.0.50, that means it's going to be put into the Palm Coast site. If I have 10.11.0.50, it's going to be put into Orlando site. So we associate a site with the subnet. And so the site properties you can see right here, we have the subnet, which is associated with Orlando with 10.11.0.0.16. Now we can also put in here a location. Now the location, this is used for like when we have locations for computers or for printers. So we can associate a site with that actual printer. So that's what that location is. Then the object, you can see that we have the checkbox for protect the object from accidental deletion. So if somebody goes ahead and clicks on delete, that it doesn't destroy our whole site. And you can see the canonical name, which is a common name, which is finalvision.com, configuration, site in Orlando. And this is going to be replicated to all the domain controllers within the forest because that's how configuration partition goes. It replicates to every domain controller. And you can see here's the security saying who can make changes to the site. And then our attributes editor is going to have all the different attributes that we have within this object. And here's the subnet properties. You can see that we have the description, which is going to be Orlando subnet, and the site that's associated with the IP address of 1010 or the subnet, the network ID of 10.11.00.16. We have the location also. We can put in the information there. Our object, same thing. We have protect the object from accidental deletion. And we have our common name, finalvision.com, configuration, sites, subnets, and we have what is going to be the actual IP address that's associated with it. And then we have a security, who can make changes to it. And then we have our attribute editor, which has all of the different attributes from all the different properties. So next, after we created our sites, next we talk about managing domain controllers in the site. Times you need to manage the DC in an Active Directory site. What we can do is we can do a drag and drop. We can also move the DC. Or when it's created, it's going to automatically be put onto the site based on the IP address. Move an existing DC to the new site. We can also demote a DC, promote a new DC. DCs and sites, the first DC installed in will be put into the default first site name. Additional DCs are added based on the IP address. Server containers contain only the DCs, domain controllers. Pre-create DCs by adding a new DC to a site. So what we can do is we can do a right click and say new domain controller. Then we have it within the site. When we actually install, it's automatically going to be there. Move a DC to a site by doing a drag and drop. Delete a DC to remove it. Now the SRV records, what they do is these are known as service records or locators, service records, locator records. So SRV for LDAP, for example, is 389. 3268 is for our global catalog. 88 is for our Kerberos. And those are our main records that we're going to have for our SRV records. They map services to host names. So saying which one is going to have the service I'm looking for. Like when a client goes and logs in, what it's going to do is it's query the DNS looking for the SRV record for the DC, which is going to be LDAP. The DC advertises their presence by a Kerberos and LDAP SRV records. Now we have the DNS Zone, which is _MSDCS. Now the first folder is going to be TCP. This contains the server records for all the domains in the domain. And then the second folder is a sites / site name, which is specific to the site and where the domain controller is located. So you can see right here, we have underneath Palm Coast TCP, we have an LDAP record 389 that indicates the domain controller in DC1.finalvision. Locator records configs. Locator record contains the service port name, service name and port. So 3268 for a global catalog, for example, that would be GC. The protocol, is it going to be TCP or UDP? TCP is used for Windows, UDP is used for Unix. The host name, which is going to identify the actual domain controller that has this service. The service and port, the portion of the SRV which indicates the service with a fixed port. It includes the 389, for example, for LDAP. Kerberos is 88. And then a Kerberos password protocol is kpassword, which is 464. The protocol, UDP or UDP, and the same service can use both protocols. That way it's available for Windows and also for Unix. Kerberos uses TCP for Windows and UDP for Unix clients. The host name, the name corresponds to the A record, which could be the A record which is the host record, or a quad A for the server hosting the service. Client queries for a service. The DNS returns the SRV record and a record. That way it can point to which domain controller, for example, or global catalog that it needs to use. So in translation, you can look right here. We got palmcoast_sites dc-msdcs finalvision.com. The service is going to be LDAP. The product protocol is TCP. We have a priority of 0. The weight is 100. The port number is 389. And the host is dc1 finalvision.com. Now the DC location, the client attempts to log on. So what happens? Well, the client will query the DNS_TCP folder SRV records in the site associated with the IP address. The DNS will then return a list of DCs. Then what happens, the client is going to pick the DC that's closest to them. The client will attempt to contact all of them. The first DC to respond will authenticate the client. The client will use this DC from the point forward. So what it does is it's going to tattoo it, or it's going to become a referral. So that DC from that point on is going to be the DC that it's going to use for logging in. Then we have what is known as site coverage. When a DC is not available in the site, what happens? Well, the nearby DC will register its SRV record in the site. The site coverage is what it's known as. And the DC connection will be provided to the client which has the lowest cost. So whatever DC has the lowest cost, that's the one it's going to use. So I got to practice configuring sites and subnets. You're going to configure the default site. Exercise 2, you're going to create an additional site. The time is going to be 30 minutes. What I do recommend is that you go ahead and do this so you understand how sites work, creating additional sites, and we're configuring it. We're going to be covering some more in the next modules that will clear up some of the other questions you may have. Also, make sure you watch the demos because we'll be going through the same information that we do go through with the modules. Again, if you have any questions, you can always put them in the GoGo box. Thanks for joining us.